Gut feelings. Depression as an embodied and affective phenomenon in Houellebecq's Serotonin. Paper by Jenny Slatman and Ange Van Deven. Abstract. Current debates about the possible causes of depression reinforce the age old body mind dualism. While some claim that depression is caused by psychological or societal stress, others underline that it results from a shortage of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the central nervous system. This paper shows that Michel Houellebecq's latest novel, Serotonin, can be read as an account of depression that goes beyond this body mind dualism. Moreover, we will argue that his way of narrating invites us to reconsider the restorative power of narrative in pathography, a genre that is a primary focus within medical humanities. The first section of the paper discusses, while drawing on Wilson's work on new materialism, that although the title of the novel Serotonin may suggest that Houellebecq takes sides with those who believe that depression is a brain disease, the protagonist of the novel suffers mainly from his gut feelings, which affects his entire embodied existence. Against the background of Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, the second section specifies this existential disruption in terms of an embodied I cannot. In the third section, we make clear how Houellebecq's way of narrating, plotless and episodic, reinforces these embodied feelings of incapacity. The final section, then, traces how Houellebecq, by means of his style of writing and his choice of themes, succeeds in transferring gut feelings onto the reader. If illness narratives aim at sharing experiences of illness, the narrative of depression, so we argue, had better take the form of an anti-narrative or a chaos story. Indeed, Houellebecq's anti-narrative succeeds in passing on to the reader the experience of a debilitating gut feeling and a gradual loss of grip that manifests itself as a temporal and spatial disorientation. Introduction. Depression is an urgent public health problem of our time. According to the WHO, 300 million people suffer from it at one point in their lives. Yet, when it comes to knowledge and insight into its nature and causes, much remains unclear. Depression has a heterogeneous clinical picture, meaning that the process and the response to treatment differ from patient to patient. Indeed, its psychotherapeutic and biological methods of treatment, as well as its etiology and pathogenesis, are subject to ongoing debate. Whereas some claim that depression is caused by psychological or societal stress, others underline that it results from a shortage of the neurotransmitter serotonin in the central nervous system. This debate reinforces an age-old mind-body dualism, for indeed, they suggest that the cause of the depression should be sought either in some bodily neurological defect or in ill-working psychological capacities. In this paper, we will show that Michel Houellebecq's latest novel, Serotonin, can be read as an account of depression that goes beyond this body-mind dualism. Informed by theories from new materialism and phenomenology, we will read depression and serotonin as an embodied and affective phenomenon. Moreover, we will entertain the possibility that Houellebecq's style of writing depression, as well as his thematic choice, evokes fellow feelings of disorientation and dislocation in the reader. At first sight, Houellebecq's novel can therefore be seen as a fictional illness narrative, which gives voice to a person's lived experiences from a first person's perspective. However, when we look closely at the presentation of the depressive experiences of its protagonists, we see characteristics that problematize a straightforward categorization as fictional illness narrative. Houellebecq's particular mode of pathography seems to resist narrative when we take this to refer to accounts that take the form of a story that order events in time with a beginning, middle, and end structure. and involve changes over time that affect a subject or protagonist. This manner of presentation has received a lot of attention in medical humanities research. In looking for causal relations and explanations, and thus answering the question, why me? Narrative can indeed help the subject of illness trace a single self throughout a series of discontinuous and often disruptive events. In a way, it normalizes and refamiliarizes the depressive episode as an experience. And while illuminating medical language, it can facilitate a better understanding of one's experience. As Hilary Clark writes, narratives stitch up the wounds resulting from traumatic events or simply unexpected change. The form of the story helps to retroactively make sense of a depressive episode by placing it back in a diachronic continuity, thus giving the narrative self a renewed sense of coherence. This may give the impression that narrative is the only viable form in which to communicate such experiences. Yet, there are obvious challenges to narrating depression. Depressive experiences are hard to describe adequately due to cognitive impediments and distortions. They are characterized by decidedly anti-narrative or narrative-resistant elements. In Reading for the Plot, narratologist Peter Brooks argued that plot is the design of any narrative. It consists of intentional structures of every element that pushes the story forward and steers it towards a conclusion. If the motor of narrative is desire, totalizing, building ever larger units of meaning, the ultimate determinants of meaning lie at the end. And narrative desire is ultimately, inexorably, desire for the end. In order for a story to commence, an agent must want something. Yet, as Arthur Frank has written, illness often precipitates a condition of lacking desire. And more in particular, depression is often characterized by such a lack of desire. Emblematized by Melville Bartleby's characteristic, I'd prefer not to. It is further marked by the impotence to act, while actions are generally considered to be the building blocks of the plot. Houellebecq's narration of depression, so we claim, can be interpreted as an account of this lack of desire, which results in a corresponding lack of plot. Houellebecq is arguably the most notorious contemporary European writer of depression. All his protagonists suffer from depression in some form or other, or to be more precise, they are depressed white males. His oeuvre has been described as chronicling the last gaps of the once dominant white male. Depression in his literary works has predominantly been interpreted by critics as critique of a sick social and political climate in the West, which is losing its possibilities for the future because of undermining neoliberal forces in its societies, leading to a crisis of imagination. Many have remarked on the connection his texts forge between sexual and political impotence, and the connection between the sick male body and the declining health of the nation and of French society. To the extent that there is no viable alternative to neoliberal capitalism, the Western world is at the end of its history, or, in the words of the narrator of Houellebecq's The Possibility of an Island, the future was empty. Even though the societal critique is an important thread throughout Serotonin, we have chosen another angle. Houellebecq's writing allows for an alternative view on depression. In Serotonin, we argue, depression entails the breakdown of our embodied existence, manifesting itself in feelings of discouragement and disgust, être écœuré, and the gradual elimination of bodily possibilities for engagement with the environment. While using elements of Frank's chaos narrative, marked by an open-ended structure and an absence of recovery, an episodic or paratactic, anti-cathartic temporal ordering, Houellebecq amplifies embodied feelings of disgust, temporal dislocation, and non-catharsis in the protagonist and the reader alike. Analyzing this literary work from a framework of phenomenological philosophy, we aim for two contributions to research in the medical humanities. One, to add to an existing body of research into alternative pathographies beyond the narrative paradigm. Two, to address, nuance, and complicate the prevalent understanding of depression as a brain or mood disorder by showing how it involves the whole body and mind as a relational phenomenon that affects the subject as an embodied being. From brain to gut. Serotonin tells the story of the depressed Florent Claude Labrouste, a 46-year-old agricultural engineer who ends a loveless relationship with a 20 years younger, thoroughly spoiled Japanese woman, Yuzu. After a joyless holiday in Spain, he decides he wants to disappear. He has had enough of Yuzu and his job at the Ministry of Agriculture. Inspired by a TV documentary called Voluntarily Missing, he deletes his internet presence, abandons his job, and leaves his apartment without telling anyone where to or why. With the money from his parents' inheritance, he can afford to stop working and to take up residence in a Parisian hotel. The story meanders between this present and Florent Claude's memories. As he sinks further and further into apathy and impotence, he considers himself to be dying and decides, as a kind of farewell ritual, that he wants to see people who were important to him. As such, he embarks on a road trip he also calls a mini farewell ceremony for my libido. He visits his old student friend Aymeric, a dairy farmer of noble descent, who is in a much worse state than Florent Claude because his wife and children have left him, and his farm is deteriorating and going bankrupt. During a peasant revolt against the imposed milk quota, Aymeric commits suicide and becomes a hero in the eyes of the local population. With respect to these events in his life, Florent Claude is only a passive observer, a bystander. In the same way, he only watches from a distance how his great lost love, Camille, leads a life of her own as a veterinarian. He loses himself in elaborate fantasies of shooting her 4-year-old son, but does not follow through and returns to his Parisian hotel instead. As soon as the hotel adopts a strictly non-smoking policy, he feels compelled to move to an anonymous residential tower. Here, he spends his days smoking and watching television, supported by the use of the antidepressant Captorix, finding himself essentially deprived of reasons to live and of reasons to die. He's dying of sorrow. With the title of the book Serotonin, Houellebecq seems to directly situate the story of the depressed Florent Claude within the neurobiological explanation model of depression, which is dominant today. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, a substance responsible for enabling communication between nerve cells. Around the 1950s, it was discovered by accident that drugs that supposedly enhanced the level of serotonin caused considerable mood improvement in people suffering from depression. The first generation of these drugs still caused major side effects. In the late 1980s, the second generation, the so-called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, such as Prozac, and serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs, such as Effexor, was launched on the health market. These promise major mood enhancement and fewer side effects. Since that time, consumption of antidepressants has increased enormously worldwide. Nicholas Rose estimates that between 1990 and 2000, the prescription of antidepressants in the USA has increased by 1,300%. And paced with that consumption, depression is increasingly considered as a kind of brain disorder. It has become rather common to say that depression is caused by a shortage of serotonin, or at least by some chemical imbalance in the brain. Houellebecq seems to follow this kind of reasoning when he center stages Florent Claude's consumption of the fictional antidepressant Captorix, which is described as follows. It is a small white, oval, scored tablet. It doesn't create or transform, it interprets. It renders fleeting what was definitive. It renders contingent what was ineluctable. It supplies a new interpretation of life, less rich, less artificial, and marked by a certain rigidity. It provides no form of happiness, even of real relief. Its action is of a different kind. By transforming life into a sequence of formalities, it allows you to fool yourself. On this basis, it helps people to live, or at least to not die, for a certain period of time. In the story world of serotonin, use of this medicine seems common enough. Dr. Azot does not even inquire into flow and close circumstances in life before asserting that what you need to do is to keep your serotonin at the correct level. Right now it's okay, you're fine, but lowering the cortisol and maybe increasing dopamine and endorphins, that would be ideal. The patient is not treated as an individual so much as a puzzle of hormone management. He is invited to understand himself in terms of a neurochemical self. Since Houellebecq situates the story in a zone between our present time and a point in the near future, as he often does in his novels, this enables him to introduce some futuristic elements. Captorix, he writes in the beginning of the novel, is a new kind of antidepressant, which is, in the temporal frame of the novel, recently released. At first sight, however, the fictional Captorix is very similar to common SSRIs and SNRIs. Like the existing antidepressant, it has libido loss, loss of potency, and nausea as common side effects. Also, while mentioning that the drug may work or not without anyone exactly knowing why they work or not, Houellebecq underlines the increasingly accepted view that doctors and scientists alike do not know what the operating mechanism of SSRIs and SNRIs consists of. As the doctor character says in Serotonin, if they had to wait to have absolute scientific certainty, they'd never have put out a single drug on the market. You understand all that? Also, comparable with existing antidepressants, Captorix does not really cure, but only softens the sharp edges of the depressive state. Still, Houellebecq's fictional description of both serotonin and the new drug offers a different perspective on the